Welcome, everybody. Welcome, I'm Judd Newborn. I served as founding historian of New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And today, among other things, I'm a multimedia lecturer worldwide on unique stories of the Holocaust linked to today's most compelling issues. This is my second time substituting as host for our prodigious Olivia Mattis, president of the Sousa Mendes Foundation, and for a wonderful reason. Again, she's been spending time in Jerusalem for the dedication of a city square to Aristides de Sousa Mendes. The Sousa Mendes Foundation, of course, honors the heroic Portuguese diplomat who, against orders, saved thousands of refugees struggling to escape the Nazi onslaught and was gravely punished for his deeds. Today's revelatory program is particularly pertinent given the dangerous rise of anti-Semitism. We're celebrating the extraordinary life of Sister Rose Thering, who accomplished something tremendous. Taking on the patriarchy of the Catholic Church itself and its age-old elements of anti-Semitic dogma, it was Sister Rose's efforts which helped pave the way for the famed Nostra Aetate, the Vatican II document declaring finally that Jews were not responsible for the death of Jesus and rejecting all manner of anti-Semitism. And our three guests are the perfect choices to tell this story. Barbara Wind, a scholar of interfaith relations and Holocaust studies, served for nearly 2 decades as the executive director of the Holocaust Council of Greater MetroWest. She's currently completing a biography of Sister Rose Thering, aptly titled Scaling the Mountain. A journalist, playwright, and poet, her many publications include The Myth of Jewish Non-Resistance During the Holocaust. She has also written for such major publications as the New York Times. And all of you will know the name of our second guest, Abe Foxman, who served for 28 years as National Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, a world-renowned leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, bigotry, and discrimination of all kinds. Abe has offered important consultations to world leaders on every continent, including the 3 most recent popes. A hidden child in Poland during the Holocaust, Abe presented Sister Rose Thering with the ADL's prestigious Courage to Care Award. Finally, we're delighted to have with us Oren Jacoby, the director of the Academy Award-nominated film you saw, Sister Rose's Passion. Oren's latest film, On Broadway, tells the story of the rebirth of the Broadway theater. His acclaimed film, Shadow Man, is available right now on Amazon Prime. In addition, he is the executive producer of Julia, about Julia Child, and Gabby Gifford's Won't Back Down. Oren is currently directing a documentary about the fossil fuel industry and climate change. So now let's turn the floor over to our guests, starting with Barbara Wind. Barbara?
Thank you, Judd. This is what Sister Rose looked like long before I knew her. As the daughter of Holocaust survivors, I never imagined that a nun would be my mentor and become my other mother, but that's what happened. And she was very much like my mother in many, they shared many of the same traits of courage and compassion and just perfectionism and just loving the world and the people in it. She was born in Wisconsin to a devout Catholic farm family, and Rose was the middle child of 11. She always wanted to teach, learn, and serve God. So at 16, she entered a convent, and 4 years later, she took her final vows and began teaching. For the doctorate she earned from St. Louis University, Sister Rose researched and wrote the pioneer study of anti-Semitic texts that were in the most popularly used textbooks and teaching manuals in Catholic schools. Her dissertation was taken to Vatican II by Cardinal Bea. It transformed Jewish-Christian relations, and it also transformed Sister Rose. She remained an educator and a nun all her life, but also became an activist, a feminist, and a Zionist. For her efforts, Sister Rose received numerous awards from world leaders and major institutions, and she was given honorary doctorates and celebrity and even a kind of immortality through the film that Oren Jacoby produced. But it wasn't always a bed of roses for Rose. She was criticized, humiliated, threatened, and punished, and she was even forced to endure a gratuitously shameful strip search at the airport in Austria, where she had gone to protest Kurt Waldheim's election, and he was a former Nazi who hadn't revealed that. This portrait of Rose was taken after Vatican II. The conference was convened from 1962 through 1965 to bring the Roman Catholic Church into the 20th century. Part of the modernization of many of the religious orders was the option to leave behind their traditional habits and veils that dated back to the Middle Ages. Sister Rose was glad to do that. Here, Rose is coiffed and dressed for the Evening of Roses, the annual fundraiser for an endowment at Seton Hall University named for her. It provides scholarships to educators to study the Holocaust because Rose knew how powerful teachers are. She's wearing the signature cross and Jewish star necklace that was designed especially for her by a renowned artist. She also wore a shorter necklace with the Hebrew word for remember. Sister Rose was a passionate and engaging speaker. This photo was taken in one of the many hundreds of venues in which she spoke about the need to remember the Holocaust and to learn its lesson. She often repeated the saying, "What begins with Jews never ends with Jews." But Sister Rose didn't only talk the talk, she walked the walk, traveling near and far to protest anti-Semitism within and beyond the church. She visited Israel 54 times with groups of educators to teach them about the prophet Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. She thought it crucial for them to be a witness that God's covenant with Jews remains eternal, lest they think that it was broken because they didn't believe in Jesus. I don't have the time here to go into Sister Rose's numerous and groundbreaking accomplishments, including all that I and others were able to accomplish because of her. People who didn't know us always assumed we were mother and daughter, and Rose loved that. In fact, we were like mother and daughter, not always agreeing, but always loving and mutually respectful and supportive of one another. She became an adored part of my family and often said I was the daughter she would have wanted to have had she chosen to marry and have children. Sister Rose and Elie Wiesel were colleagues, and they just had a mutual admiration society for what they were and what they were accomplishing. Anyway, she praised him and other major scholars. She praised me to him and other major scholars, which I found embarrassing and annoying because it was something my mother tended to do within her own circles. Nevertheless, I learned from her how to mentor, and I'm very proud the three of my interns became Holocaust educators at very prestigious institutions. Next slide this is Rose with the menorah she presented at the Vatican. Years later, after this was taken, in 1997, the two of us traveled to Rome to attend the Vatican conference on good and evil after Auschwitz. That trip, a comedy of errors filled with highs and lows, became the basis of the biography Rose authorized me to write. This photo shows her wearing two rings. One, I think, may have come from her family, possibly the aunt who was a nun. The second symbolized her becoming a bride of Christ. She always remained devoted to her family, her God, her friends, and her God. By the end of 2005, Sister Rose's health was in serious decline. She could no longer function without help, and she returned to her mother house in Racine. I visited her there during a stay at the local hospital. Her hospital room became her schoolroom for all who entered. Didn't matter if they were the doctor, the janitor, the dietitian, everyone who, or her family, and some of the other nuns, everyone who came to visit her or stopped by received a lecture on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. Our last phone conversation was extremely painful for me. She had just come from the convent's chapel, and I was surprised at how strong and cheerful she sounded. "I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" I asked, hoping that she had made another one of her miraculous recoveries. "Ready for heaven," she said joyfully. Having fought the good fight, she had been confessed and anointed, and was finally ready to meet her Maker. I was speechless, trying not to break into sobs. "When are you going to finish my biography?" she demanded. Forcing myself to keep my voice even and the conversation light, I replied, "It would have been finished a long time ago had you not pushed me into this job." She laughed and said, "I know you'll get it done." For her funeral mass, her sisters in Christ created this program cover as a sign of their love and respect for her. After the reception that followed the evening funeral, one of the nuns slipped me a note. It said Sister Rose had asked me to recite Kaddish at her burial the following morning. I was mystified. Why the Jewish prayer? I knew that the Kaddish is in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke. Was it possible that an earlier version of the prayer was recited at Jesus' entombment? I tossed and turned all night, waiting till morning to be able to rush downstairs where it was possible to use my cell phone and the internet. A rabbi I spoke to confirmed the possibility that the prayer, or a version of it, would have been recited in temple times. I concluded that this was Rose's final lesson. She was never one to miss any teaching opportunity, even from the grave. She wanted to impress on her biological family, her religious family, and all present at her Christian burial that Jesus was a Torah-observant Jew. And for those who believe in resurrection, still is. Thank you so much.
That's great, Barbara. We're going to turn the program over now to Abe Foxman. Abe, are you?
Thank you. Sister Rose was a quintessential example of the power of one. How one individual can make a difference, a global difference. Sister Rose, it's almost impossible for us to imagine, to understand what this little lady, this nun from Wisconsin, took on. She took on her superiors, her church, the Vatican, Christianity, a history of 2,000 years, and gospel. And this is from a believing Christian Catholic who devoted her life to Christianity and to church. And she had the strength, the individual strength, the courage to take all of them on because of her faith in what is true, what is just. And she would not be deterred. As you heard, there were threats, intimidations, threats of ostracizing. And when you look at in perspective, she not only changed the Catholic position on the Jews, but she changed the gospel. Vatican II would not have happened, would have not included Nostra Aetate if it wasn't for Sister Rose. Now, there are organizations and institutions, and I was part of a major effort in the ADL and Christian-Jewish relations, and we all lobbied and we all wrote, and but at the end of the day, sure, we helped push it. But if it wasn't for her initiative, for her courage, for her insistence, it wouldn't have happened. But she not only got the church to forgive the Jews, but also to change this concept that the only road to salvation is through Christianity and Catholicism. When Pope John Paul visited the synagogue, it was the most dramatic change in the history of the church, because by the Pope John Paul going to the synagogue, to the shul, he said not only to us, the Jewish people, but he said to Christianity that Judaism is a valid religion, and Judaism's faith will also bring you to salvation. And as you heard, she didn't stop when she attained this goal. She took on the Vatican on the issue of Israel. the policy of the Vatican was horrific on Israel. It was pro-Arab most of the time. It took years and years for the Pope to visit Israel, to recognize the Jewish state as a Jewish state. And so that was her second battle. She wasn't as successful, but she certainly pushed the church time and time again for a better, more honest, open relationship with the Jewish state. She became a warrior for the freedom of Soviet Jewry. I mean, she took on issues of Jewish continuity, safety on all levels. So once she accomplished the acceptance of the Jews, if you will, by the church, then she was concerned that it be implemented. The Jews have the acceptance and the freedom. And so Soviet Jewry became a major issue. She stood up and traveled everywhere there were manifestations of anti-Semitism, whether it was with the Farrakhands, whether it was with Waldheim. There was no manifestation of anti-Semitism that you would not find Sister Rose in the audience or up front or in writing, etc. When I was at the ADL, I've gotten to know her, work with her, share platforms with her, give her platforms. And I had the privilege and the good, to present her with our highest award, the Courage to Care Award, which the Courage to Care Award was given to the righteous, to those who during the war or their families saved Jews. But in our book, to us, Sister Rose was in that category because in terms of our times, her work helped save Jewish life. And again, those of us, if you would meet her, you could not recognize the force that was there. I was, again, very privileged to know her, work with her, and be her friend. I believe even to this day, she's one of the most underrated and unappreciated heroes of the Jewish people. I think today's program should be a new beginning. The film certainly would help. She was motivated not only by what was right and just, which would have been enough, but she was offended by anti-Semitism in the gospel of the church, especially since her Lord and Savior was Jewish. And that to her was so offensive. How could the church tolerate, teach hatred of the Jews when her Lord was Jewish? That was the motivation. And you know what? She should be a heroine for Jewish people and for all people who believe in the power of one individual to change the world.
That's beautiful, Abe. Thank you so much for that. Now let's turn to Oren Jacoby, the Academy Award-winning director, nominated director of the film.
Thank you. Thank you, Abe. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you and Barbara to celebrate Sister Rose Thering. And thank you, Olivia and Judd and the Susa Mendez Foundation for hosting the screening and this conversation. It's been almost 20 years since I met Rose, and 16 since she left us. But Rose Thering's feisty spirit is so enduring that I can't even hear her name without a smile coming to my face. Meeting Rose Thering led to one of the great adventures of my life, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to share a little of that journey with you. It surprises me always a little to find myself still associated with Rose so long after we made the film together. But I'm grateful to be connected in even a small way to the work that she set in motion. I was a very unlikely choice to make a documentary about this extraordinary woman. I'm not religious. I wasn't passionate about her cause. At first, I didn't even understand it. And unlike Rose, I'm not particularly courageous. I was an accidental recruit, an odd match for a visionary like Rose. But now, as I unravel our intertwined stories, I see how it ended up being a happy accident for both of us. In 2003, I was approached to make a film about Broadway legend Elaine Stritch. As often happens, Elaine got busy and that picture fell through. But the man who had wanted to hire me said, well, how'd you like to make a movie about another octogenarian I know? She's a nun from New Jersey. To be honest, I wasn't all that interested, but I was polite. Tell me more. He said, well, she's 84 years old and she's devoted her life to fighting anti-Semitism. I'm embarrassed to admit this now, especially in front of Abe Foxman, but I asked him, is anti-Semitism even a thing today in our society? You have to remember, those were different times than the scary moment that we find ourselves in now. I knew anti-Semitism had mattered to my parents' generation. They'd lived through World War II and the Shoah. At least they knew what was reported about it at the time. And as a kid, I remember hearing my mother say that even though she was a nationally ranked golf champion, after she married my father, a Jew, she was no longer welcome at a lot of country clubs. But that was the 1950s. So I said to this producer, do you really think a documentary about a nun fighting anti-Semitism is something people will care about? What's she up to these days? When he told me her health was declining and that she was in a wheelchair and hooked up to an oxygen tank, I got pretty skeptical. I pictured a frail old woman. Please, he said, just meet her. A few days later, at a benefit for Israel in the Grand Hyatt Hotel in New York, I did. There was nothing frail about Rose. Here's what I saw. She was tough, she was smart, she was funny, and she cut to the chase. We barely talked, but after those few minutes, I'd been recruited for Rose's army. I didn't know exactly what had hit me, but I was going to make this movie all right. The producers said, you know, this is going to be an Oscar contender. I just laughed and said, are you kidding? I don't have a clue what I'm going to film. What is there to show? I soon found out. It turned out anti-Semitism was still a thing. And it was something that Rose had been aware of since she was a little girl and started asking tough questions. You may remember from the film that Rose began by asking her parents those hard questions. The church fathers were next. And as you've heard from Barbara, Rose went on to study how Catholic teaching materials had encouraged anti-Semitic hatred and violence for centuries. And her work led to Nostra Aetate, the Pope's edict calling for brotherhood between Christians, Jews, and Muslims. That had all happened 40 years before I met Rose. But when I came along, she was still at it and as feisty as ever. In the course of making our film, a few things happened that changed my understanding of Rose and of how anti-Semitism or any other, quote, hatred of the other, unquote, actually works. It usually begins when someone with a big audience lights the fuse. This time, a Hollywood blockbuster by Mel Gibson sparked a firestorm. We all found out that anti-Semitism was more than just a thing. It was on the rise in America, just like the rest of the world. But Gibson's movie and ours also started a conversation that had a positive impact. Sister Rose's Passion wound up winning the Tribeca Film Festival. Robert De Niro gave Rose a big kiss when we got the award. And then we were nominated for an Academy Award. I wish you could have seen Rose at the Oscars luncheon when Warren Beatty came over to flirt with her. She didn't exactly know who he was, but she appreciated the attention of this tall, handsome man who went down on one knee to tell her how great she was. Through Sister Rose, I was introduced to a community of Christians and Jews who were standing up to this new surge of anti-Jewish bigotry and hatred. I met James Carroll, and together we made a second film about a Roman Catholic going through a crisis of conscience. Like Rose, Carroll felt compelled to investigate the roots of Christian anti-Semitism. In his book and our film, Constantine's Sword, he traced that dark history, all the way from ancient Rome through World War II to today. Jim knew, as Rose had, that if you're going to be true to yourself, you have to be willing to ask yourself tough questions. Working on these two films, I learned that in moments of crisis, even in the darkest hours of history, there actually are people who have a kind of moral courage that makes them stand apart from the rest of us. People like Rose. Okay, Rose Thering was exceptional. She was a hero. But if we're moved by her courage, what are we called on to do? Maybe you remember the scene in the film where Rose tells a class of young school kids that they have to stand up to bullies. So what would Sister Rose ask of us? Is there anything we can do to stop hatred? Especially now when we can see what it's doing to the very fabric of our society? I wish I could say, for Rose's sake, after all her work, that things have gotten better. But hate crimes are up. And last year, Jews were the target of nearly 60% of them, more than any other group, even though they make up only 2% of the population. We've been hearing on TV about the role the Proud Boys played in the insurrection at the Capitol. Remember that their attack on our democracy began when they marched in Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and were called very fine people by an American president. I'm pretty sure if Rose were here with us, she'd say, we can't just shut our eyes and pretend all this will just go away. She'd say, as she did in that classroom, don't let the haters win. Don't let them shush you up. She wouldn't be happy if we let the bullies win. She'd say, we've got to believe that love is the thing that can save us now. And for Rose's sake, I think we better give it a try. Thank you, Judd. Over to you.
Thank you, Oren. Well, you've all three of you spoken so beautifully. I know we're all grateful for that. And we'll come back to take questions, pose questions. And so everybody, while I'm telling you about coming attractions, please start posting your questions. Now, let me tell you that we're going to be ending the Sousa Mendez series on a high note indeed, and this season. Our next program on November 20th focuses on Meyer Weisgall, a forgotten Zionist visionary who focused a spotlight on the urgent need to rescue the imperiled Jews of Europe in the 1930s. He did so through determined, creative, and often ingenious endeavors. These included a substantial publication celebrating the birth of the Hebrew University, his spectacular pageants at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair and on Broadway, and his conceptualization of the popular Jewish-Palestinian Pavilion at New York's 1939 World's Fair. All of this to ensure the flourishing of the Jewish people. Now, our season's end program is on December 4th, 4 p.m. New York time, and it's a very special one indeed for you and for the foundation. As our annual fundraiser, we're bringing to you a celebration of life, the rescue mission of Mr. and Mrs. Krauss. This heartwarming and uplifting program tells the story of a Jewish couple, Gilbert and Eleanor Krauss, who dared travel to a rabidly anti-Semitic Vienna in 1939 after the Anschluss with Germany to save 50 Jewish children from a near certain death. And we have a special master of ceremonies for this program, the multi-talented New York-based actress and singer, Samantha Massell. Samantha has appeared on Broadway and television, in movies and cabaret. She was last seen as Huddle in the acclaimed Broadway revival of Fiddler on the Roof. She's originated lead roles in many world premiere musicals and has held recurring roles on Mr. Mercedes and on Chicago Fire, and has guest starred on NCIS New Orleans, The Good Fight, and Elementary. Now, this special fundraiser, which is so essential to continuing the foundation's good work, has various levels of donation, starting with a single ticket and a generous anonymous donor who'll be making it possible for those who need assistance to attend so that no one is turned away. And we thank this donor from the heart. There's also a season ticket option for the coming year with a special gift for you included and more. And finally, the crucial sustainers level of donation. You can see the details on our Sousa Mendes Foundation events webpage and in the email invitations you'll be receiving to register. And now we're going to have a short clip from the film you'll be seeing when you sign up for our year-end program, 50 Children, the Rescue Mission of Mr. and Mrs. Krause.
What on earth would go through my grandparents' mind to leave 2 children behind, leave the safety of their home, and go into Nazi Germany?
In the spring of 1939, Gilbert and Eleanor Krause traveled from Philadelphia into the heart of Germany.
They understood that this was a matter of life and death.
To save 50 Jewish children on the eve of the Holocaust.
My father said, we may die here, but she's not going to die. She's going to go and lead a life in America.
They understood that when that door closed, the fate of those Jewish communities was sealed.
When it came to saving lives, he was going to go do something, and it was right.
Well, here's another extraordinary unsung story of rescue and moral fortitude, like Sister Rose, but in another way, that the Sousa Mendes Foundation is committed to bringing to you and to celebrating. Okay, now we have time to pose questions to our guests. So let's see what we have here. Give me a little second. One question is, how does one deal with the Arab myth that the Jews murdered their prophets, meaning Jesus? Does anyone want to take that?
I'll take that.
Okay, Barbara.
I'm not muted, right?
No, we're hearing you.
Okay, good. So one of Sister Rose's constant complaints was that the Middle East was becoming Christian Rhine, just as the Germans wanted to make Europe Judenrein, clean of Jews, and now the Middle East is pretty much clean, clean of so to speak, of Christians. I don't know how to counter that myth because it's a belief, and it's very hard to change people's beliefs. I will tell you that at the HBO screening of the film about that Oren made, Sister Rose's Passion, when the film was over, there was a Muslim woman in the audience in hijab, and she got up and she praised Sister Rose for her work and for the film, and she asked the question, what should we Muslims do to change how the world sees Muslims? And without skipping a beat, Sister Rose, this was really at the end of her life in the East, with her oxygen tank, said, the first thing to do is change your textbooks, your school books. And I hope it doesn't take you 2,000 years. So that was Rose. But, she knows that it has to begin with the textbooks. It has to begin with a classroom. And, right now, it's beginning to happen finally in some parts of the Middle East, but most of the Middle East is still teaching that Muslim is a supersessionist religion, as the church used to teach that Christianity superseded Judaism.
Wonderful.
Yeah. When I was at the ADL, we did a survey, a global survey of anti-Semitism. And the percentage of anti-Semitism in the Arab and North Africa and the Muslim countries was 70, 80, 90%. So it's very deep. It's deep because of religious teaching. It's deep because of political teachings, etc. That's the bad news. The good news is things are changing, as Barbara indicated. The Abraham Accords are a beginning, and we're seeing in at least the countries who have recognized Israel, there are Holocaust commemorations in the UAE, in Bahrain, which it was things unthinkable. So there is a beginning of an effort. The Saudis have changed their textbooks. Certainly some of the textbooks in UNRWA are being changed. It's a slow process, but it is changing.
I have a very interesting question. It's a question certainly of our time. I don't know whether it would be a question for Rose's time, but someone asks, was Rose a supporter of the LGBTQ community? Is there anyone who, Barbara, perhaps that's something you might want to
I don't know that she was a supporter, because we were, there was, in her day, there was no LGBTQ community. You were gay or you were not gay. And she was, she never, it was not something that we ever discussed, but I think that she would have supported that because she was, I know that she would have supported it. I should say, I know that she would have supported it because she believed that that we all human beings are made in the image of God, number one. And she also believed what Matthew said in the Gospels, that which, quoting Jesus, that which you do unto the least of me, you do unto me, so that you cannot say or do anything to hurt another human being without offending God.
Well, there's a beautiful answer. And she was obviously a beautiful person. So I imagine she would have been beautiful in this issue as well. Here's a question for Oren. Your mother, the questioner says your mother was a non-Jew, is that correct? And how were you raised? I know you mentioned that you were not raised religiously. Perhaps to add to that issue, something about how Sister Rose, working on the Sister Rose project, changed you.
I'm going to say something about that in the final remarks, but I will address the more specific question about, yes, my mother was Episcopalian. Her family had, been here since the Mayflower, and there'd been many ministers along the way. She belonged very much to a secular age where she believed that you should, care about all people and you shouldn't be divided by religion or anything else. That being said, she did send me to Sunday school when I was a little kid for a couple of, a year or two to sort of learn the basics of, religion and know something. And then I ended up in high school going to a Quaker school where I was required by the school to go to Quaker meetings every Friday morning. So I was exposed to the values of the Quaker Church at a particularly important time in American history where they were standing up for civil rights and they were opposing the war in Vietnam. And I sort of associated their movement with, a lot of positive values and learned more about interfaith efforts in the civil rights movement too. So that part of my religious background, such as it was important. But as I said in my remarks, I've always been, much more secular, and Rose just awakened in me a better understanding, of both halves of my heritage, which I'll address a little bit at the end.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Here's a question for Barbara from an audience member. Did you experience any anti-Semitism yourself with Sister Rose when you were working together? You mentioned some of the issues in Austria with Waldheim. So along the way, did you experience it yourself with her?
I will say that I did experience one startling scene of anti-Semitism, and it came from a cardinal. He was asked why when good things happen between Christians and Jews, nobody reports it, but when bad things happen, it's always reported. And his immediate response, he was embarrassed afterwards, but his immediate response was, well, the Jews control the media. The old anti-Semitic trope that the Jews control the banks, the Jews control the media. If we had so much control, we wouldn't have lost a third of our people during the Holocaust, right? But that is, that's the trope that's come down, especially through the protocols of the Elders of Zion that was referred to earlier. And even before that, Wilhelm Marr, the German political agitator, and and a failed politician and journalist. He coined the word anti-Semitism because he wanted to eliminate the rights of the emancipation of German Jews. He wanted to eliminate that because he felt that Jews had become too privileged. So it's always that, yeah.
Thank you. Here's a question for Abe, I think. Did Sister Rose address the issue of Holocaust denial?
Yeah.
Yes, she did. Once she achieved the change in the gospel and the church, she then turned to all other issues which contributed to anti-Semitism. And to her, Holocaust was a very important issue. She talked about it, she taught it, she engaged in making sure that people understood what hate can bring to. It starts with words and it ends with the crematory on Auschwitz. So yes, she was very, very much concerned with Holocaust denial. And also at a certain point, I remember Holocaust trivialization, which Holocaust is one thing. If you begin to trivialize the Holocaust, then it's in a way in popular culture, it becomes even more detrimental to memory and history. Yes, it was part of her agenda. And when she encountered it, she spoke out and taught against it.
And I would like to add to that, the fear of Holocaust denial is what brought me to Sister Rose, because I had written some manuscripts of Holocaust poems, and I was ready to send them out for publication. And then I took a step back and I said, I'm not sure I have all the facts right. And so I called the endowment and I said, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a classroom teacher. I do some teaching. I'm a writer. And Sister Rose said, I consider writers teachers, come and study with us. And so, I did, because I wanted to make sure they were right. And coincidentally, a book of them was translated by the daughter of a German Wehrmacht officer and published in Germany by a Catholic press, EOS Verlag.
Amazing. That's really the ironies of history, but that's wonderful. I think a question for Oren. Sister Rose is shown in the film criticizing Mel Gibson's film, The Passion of Christ. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about that. I myself dissected that film in a newspaper feature. How did Sister Rose participate in that controversy?
Well, as you see in the film, there are several members of a group of interfaith leaders who were provided a copy of the screenplay of that film before it was made by the producers or by someone. I can't remember, Abe, were you involved in that?
Very much, very much.
Yeah, and so it was a big Hollywood studio. This was going to cost millions of dollars, and they must have sensed there was something toxic in it, or they wouldn't have gone to this effort. But anyway, they sent it around. And this group of people that included Abe and included Jim Carroll, Father John Palikowski, who's in the film, a number of other scholars who were there, they all very pointedly told the studio that this was a dangerous take on the gospel, and that it resurrected some of the worst tendencies pre-Nostra Aetate of pushing this dogma that the Jews were responsible and that we should hate Jews because they killed Jesus. And as soon as Rose became aware, she became very involved about this. And she was the one who insisted we put it in the movie. She wanted to talk out against it in the movie. And I think it was a very important stand, and again, a courageous stand for her to take, because the movie had already come out when we did talk about it, and millions of people were going to see it. And for her to sort of defied, there weren't many church spokesmen who went out and spoke against it. For her to take a stand against it was a big deal. And I think it's also partly why we got nominated for an Oscar. I'm not sure it would have had the same attention if that film hadn't come out and been that push for a new wave of this kind of hatred.
When I was at the ADL, we received in the mail anonymously the script of the movie. And at that time, we shared it around with some of the scholars, Christian and Jewish, and reached out to Mel Gibson. He then publicly accused us of having stolen the script,
Right.
brought a suit against us to return it. We returned it. And then what was happening is when we criticized it, he would say, you didn't see it. How can you criticize it? But he wouldn't permit us to go see it. So I went, I acted as a, what's called the Jewish church in Brooklyn. And I got in to see the film. So he could not accuse us that you don't know what you're talking about, you didn't see it, etc. But it was very, very important, not just for the Jews to challenge it, but to get Christian leaders and spokesmen to stand up. And that's what makes Sister Rose's voice in this battle very, very important, because she spoke as a Catholic, as a Christian, and as a scholar on the Gospels and the story of anti-Semitism.
A little note, I recall reading that a Jewish screenwriter, that Mel Gibson hired a Jewish screenwriter to write a script about Judah the Maccabee, and that he was, which would have been in keeping with his kind of violent, epics of, war and battle and whatever. And he, of course, loved violence. But apparently he was trying to whitewash himself, and he was actually, the screenwriter said that he was never serious about it. He exhibited all sorts of anti-Semitic rants and rages. And of course, no film ever came about. I think all of us probably, this is for Barbara, I think, we're dumbfounded that Sister Rose should have been subjected to a strip search in Austria. I mean, this is like beyond belief. Can you tell us anything about that? And was anyone ever punished for that?
Well, this is what happened. She went to Austria along with a number of other prominent Jewish leaders and with the Serge and Beata Klarsfeld to protest the election of the former Secretary General of the United Nations and the Nazi who she always said that he had Waldheimer's disease because he didn't talk about his Nazi past in Greece. And when she was there, she was accosted and people coming right up to her and saying, "You're not a Schwester, you're not a sister, you're a Jew, and we're going to come back and hang you from the lampposts," and so on and so forth. So, but they did the right thing. They did what they could do. The people voted him in, and he served for 6 years as president. But when she was leaving Austria on her way home, she was called into a room and strip searched by a very rough guard. And she would describe it. She would say, "Off, off, off," as the guard ordered her to undress and so on. And clearly there was no, they were not searching for anything that they could find on her. She was on her way home. What could they do? It was just a way of humiliating her, and especially for a nun, modesty is so important, right? So whoever was in charge of that did that, of that strip search. But when she got home, and of course she was so upset, you can imagine how traumatizing this was to her, especially that, she came from a Germanic community. Many of the sermons that the priests preached, the homilies, were in German. And as a child, when she played priest with her younger siblings that she was babysitting, she would pretend to speak German when it came to the homily. So, so this was doubly offensive in a sense to her. But when she came home and she told people about it, it made front page news. So in a way, it was what she would call a happy fault, that because of this, she and the endowment got notoriety, and the case of Waldheim didn't die out as fast in the newspapers.
I see. That's a great answer. Thank you for that. And now I have my own question for Abe. When I was lecturing at a Catholic college in South Carolina, I was rather innocently invited to attend an Easter week recitation of the Gospel of St. John. They had some students from the debate society representing one faction and another faction. And I was just astounded I was stunned by the anti-Semitic content of that. And so I'm wondering, given Nostra Aetate and Sister Rose's fight, is there any difference between the church dogma, which Nostra Aetate is supposed to have changed, and the actual liturgy?
The answer is yes and no. And the changes were mandated, authorized and mandated, but they have to be implemented. There are a lot of teachings of the church that are ignored, not implemented. So on the whole, I would say a major difference. But you will find the anti-Semitic liturgy in many places around the world, certainly in Latin America and Central America. It means the edicts or the teachings or the mandates of Vatican II in a lot of issues have not been implemented, and certainly not in the Nostra Aetate. But the fact is that globally, there is a policy, there's a different view. It's probably the most dramatic thing in the history of anti-Semitism is the church turnaround. So I wouldn't make light of it, but not to expect, every cardinal has a certain leeway, certainly the priests have even more leeway. So yeah, it still exists, but nothing like it existed. And it can be challenged, and and again, there's an opportunity to teach about it. But no, it's not totally gone. It probably will never be gone, probably certainly not in our lifetime. But the change is very dramatic and very meaningful.
May I add to that something? When Sister Rose defended her dissertation at the Jesuit St. Louis University, one of the priests got up and said, "Who does that nun think she is? She'll never change the Gospels." And in fact, we have seen that, that there has been an emergence of conservative Catholicism with the churches who are who are using the Latin Mass rather than the vernacular, and so on and so forth. So, but that's a problem in every religion. We have to understand that too.
That was the Mel Gibson issue and the Mel Gibson challenge, bringing the church back to conservative Christianity and Catholicism, which included the anti-Semitism. And that's what made that film that important to deal with, because he was the most popular. It was People's Choice, the greatest director, the greatest actor. He was #1. And therefore, for him to try to push it back with the audience that he had was a major challenge, which we could not ignore. And certainly Sister Rose understood it, that it was a challenge to her church, to her beliefs, to her truth in the church.
Well, I don't want to co-opt anybody's last, final thoughts. And I don't know, this may be a very obvious question, but I was thinking about rising anti-Semitism today. If I am co-opting anyone, tell me. We've been witnessing it in very disturbing ways. Oren mentioned it. And I'm wondering what kind of action might Sister Rose have taken, knowing the way she worked at Vatican II. Did she work behind the scenes, obviously? Would she have had any influence today?
Well, she would have been outspoken, first of all. When in the last, just couple of weeks with Kyrie Irving, a member of the New York Nets, widely disseminating an anti-Semitic film and saying how he thinks it's so great, and then being defended by many people in the African-American community as, oh, don't pick on this guy. Mm-hmm. No one's picking on African-Americans. They're singling out someone who is, promulgating anti-Semitic opinions, which should be as offensive to his community as it is to the Jewish community. And I think she would have spoken up. She would have said, come on, New York. We don't want someone who's playing basketball for us who's talking like this. Someone has to talk to him and educate him and tell him why this isn't good.
Sadly, you raised, I don't hear the voice of the church. There is this great rise in anti-Semitism that we see on social media, etc. I don't hear the voice of the church. Okay, so she would have been the voice, and she would have prodded them. There's a lot of silence. The recent incidents have raised an awareness. Some corporations have stood up and acted out against it. The sports community is speaking out, but I don't see the religious community speaking out. So yeah, absolutely. If she were here, you would hear the voice, and she would be the one challenging the church to raise its voice.
I want to add a note of hope on that. And it's very hard to be hopeful given the situation. But there is an organization called ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. And they have been doing enormous work. They were originally at Yale University, but now they're at Cambridge in England. And they have gathered, they are doing Sister Rose's work in a sense. She would be very proud of them because they are gathering scholars, professors from all over the world, including from the Muslim world, including from the Arab Emirates and so on, who are learning about anti-Semitism, learning about how to counter it in the classroom and in the churches. And so that is the only hopeful message that I can bring on this terrible, terrible threat that's threatening the whole world. Because as she said, as Elie Wiesel said, what begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. There were 6 million killed in the Holocaust. There were more than 60 million people all over the world killed during the war that started with anti-Semitism.
Yes, yes, very wise comments from all three of you. Our programs normally last 1 hour, and I'm not supposed to go over that, but I want to just mention that your dialogue, as each of you came forward to give your own comments, I found that very moving and very fascinating. And so I think this has been a wonderful program, really a trenchant program. And I think it's time now to ask for some final thoughts. So I'm going to start with Barbara, then Oren and Abe. So Barbara, do you have some final thoughts to sum up anything you want to say about the program, Sister Rose, today?
Well, I would love to see that program released. I know it's available on YouTube, and I know it's available to educators because somebody gave a grant for that. But I would love to see it re-released and maybe, a little bit updated if that's necessary on the PBS stations for maybe Yom HaShoah that's coming up. Just to remind the world, Abe talked about, she's basically forgotten now, and her work is more important than ever. And Abe said that in the film originally. We're going to need more Sister Roses than now, and his words have come to pass. So I think it's really, really important to see if it's possible to get the film shown.
That's excellent comments. And Oren, I know you have something special you want to say regarding in your final thoughts.
Well, I want to thank the person who asked about this earlier. I hate to end with something about me, but I'll bring it back around to Sister Rose. You can probably tell by now that Sister Rose changed me, or at least helped me discover something about myself. As I mentioned earlier, I come from a mixed marriage. My mother was Episcopalian. My father was a son of Jewish immigrants. Neither of them were very religious. As a result, I never really knew where I fit in. At one point in the film, Rose asks, "What is a Jew?" As a kid, I was always worried, where do I belong? What am I? Thanks to Rose, I found out. I'm a Jew, but I guess I'm also a Christian, because Rose was a devout Catholic, but I think she would have said she was a Jew too. And I think it's, without being disloyal to any of our parents or our group, maybe we can learn to love all people the way Rose did. If we care about each other, then maybe we can feel connected by all the things that we share, no matter how many things separate us or how much we disagree. And I think Rose would say that, maybe that's a way we can find a way forward together before it's too late. So thank you. And thanks everybody for watching this today.
Thank you. And Abe, maybe you can sum up for us also your thoughts.
She helped the church to do the right thing. And I'm sure that as tough as things are today, she helped to prevent some pain and anguish to the Jewish people, even today, by what she did, by changing the gospel, the teachings, the environment. I guess if we, the Jewish people, had an institution of a saint, she would qualify to be a saint amongst the Jewish people. And maybe we can get the Vatican to broaden its definition of sainthood, because I think she, and maybe, forgive me if it sounds arrogant, I think she helped to save the soul of the church. And wow, how important that is for the church and also for its relationship with the Jewish people. Again, knowing as she did how the church, from whom the church began. So I wish, Barbara, I don't know how we do this, and this film is so important today. If we don't have Sister Rose in person, we certainly have her message on the screen. And if there's a way to promote it and get it out in the schools and the institutions and during the commemorations, to give a rebirth to a woman who cared so much about what is right and about the Jewish people.
Well, hear, hear. I knew that this program was going to be very interesting and important, but I had no idea it would be as important as you three wonderful guests have made it. You've just spoken all so trenchantly and so much from the heart about the importance of Sister Rose. And yes, I think she ought to be a saint. And maybe she is a saint. Maybe she doesn't have to be proclaimed one to be one. Well, thank you very much. A heartfelt thank you to our guests and to all of you for spending this hour with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next two programs with Olivia as we end our season, grateful as always for your support. Thank you, guests. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.